Follow your own process to learn your own way. There's no right way to study and there's no right way to learn because everyone does everything differently. Hi, I'm Sunny. And I'm your host. Whoa, that was close. And welcome to Someone Else's Cloud. Hi, I'm Sunny, and I'm your host, and welcome to Someone Else's Cloud. Thanks for tuning in. We're now available on all major podcasting platforms, and if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This is episode 2, and today we'll be talking about the AZ-300 Microsoft Azure Architect Technologies exam. I'll share with you my tips, the process I went through, the study materials I used, and my thoughts on the new replacement exam, AZ-300. So let's get started. Okay, so quick introductions. So I covered this in the AZ-103 Azure Administrator episode, so I'll keep this one brief. So I've been in the IT industry for about 20 years now, and I've basically started on an internet help desk and then moved into a sysadmin role and then a bunch of engineer type roles. Right now, heavily focused on cloud, primarily Microsoft Azure. I've always been one to dislike inefficient processes and wasted time. So everywhere I've worked, I've always tried to improve processes or add automation where possible. So adjusting to this so-called DevOps sort of mindset isn't that difficult. It's actually quite exciting. I'm a big fan of working smarter, not harder. So I've got about 1.5 years hands-on experience in Azure at the moment. We're actually looking at trying to implement things like Azure policy to sort of centralize global configurations to remove those manual configuration tasks, obviously to keep things in check as well. Introduce Azure DevOps and pipelines to automate builds to allow us to introduce validation and testing, which we don't have. And I'm currently working on a monitoring solution at the moment using log analytics, which is quite interesting. So doing these exams, I guess, helps expand the knowledge, which is actually quite helpful so far. So how I prepared for the exams. Just want to mention that I did the AZ-103 Azure Administrator exam before any of these exams. I did it because it was retiring and I already had all the content. So I actually did it on the last day it retired. I wanted to do it to gauge or validate my experience to see where I was at, as well as get me in the mindset of sitting exams because I hadn't actually done any exams for 10 years or longer. And a side note also is that I did the AZ-301, which is the Design Architect exam, before I did the AZ-300. And my reason for that was I heard the 301 or the 300 was more hands-on. So I thought going from 103 to 301 would be better because the 301 was more theory and design orientated, which would expand my knowledge and exposure to multiple services or the wealth of services to prep me up, I guess, to do the AZ-300. So the study materials I used, I have access to a cloud guru. So I used the AZ-300 content. I really like the cloud guru videos. The structure is very easy to digest. Funny enough, the video is actually made by the Linux Academy. That was a good starting point. I used WizLab's test exams. My success rate, I think, from sitting those test exams was actually I only passed 1 out of the 5. So if you do them as well, don't really gauge your pass rate. They do have more questions, but the WizLab's test exams were quite helpful because they help you gauge your knowledge as well as highlight your gaps. Every time you get a wrong answer, you can read through your wrong answers and it provides you with snippets as well as links to Microsoft documentation. The problem with doing the WizLabs was every time I thought I was going to do well, I kept failing because each exam had new content. I was able to pass my exams at the first go, so go figure. Obviously, Microsoft documentation, as mentioned, a lot of that was from links from WizLabs, because they give you direct links to the topics, as well as reading my own documentation. So I've got comments here about a lab. Now, my lab was actually from the AZ-103 exam, because that's where I did more VNet peering, VPN setups, AAD Connect and things like that. So I won't really cover much. You can see on the screen what I did. I actually did use Terraform, but doing the AZ-300 and 301, I barely used my labs. I felt like there was no need to go into details. So that's up to you. I would recommend that you have at least 6 months hands-on experience before doing the architecture exams. But, if you can learn off theory, then go ahead. Just my thoughts. So we'll go into the next topics. So the next topics are the skills measured by the exams. Obviously, you just wanted to highlight that the AZ-300 exam was retired on September 30th and was replaced with the AZ-303 exam, just so you know. But I think this video is still beneficial because the topics are still quite similar. I'm guessing there's only maybe a 15% difference. So we'll just cover, I guess, all the topics and the things that I think you should look out for. The first skill measured is deploy and configure infrastructure, which is 40 to 45%. So now this is a very broad spectrum because it's anything infrastructure. First topic is virtual machine deployment and management. So obviously you should know how to deploy a virtual machine and configure it through different ways, so AZ commands and ARM templates. Azure backups and recovery service vaults, just know policies and retention, as well as the backup agent, so the Mars agent. Yeah, you'll be covered probably more around recovery service vaults. Have an understanding of network security groups. Network security groups, that sort of ties in, I guess, with virtual machine management. So just know about policies, know about the default Microsoft policies that come with any subnet associated to a VNet. VNet peering is probably something that you should test. Testing in a lab with VNet peering doesn't actually cost you anything unless you're transferring data. So I'd recommend that you do test it. I think most people that walk into a job doing Azure work will generally not set up VNets because they're already set up. So you wouldn't really do peering, VPN setups and things like that unless you're working for a small shop. So I haven't really touched any sort of VNet peering at work or any sort of VPN setup or express route work actually. So I'd suggest that you try and test as much as you can in your own lab. AAD Connect configuration and management. So that's a big one, like hybrid identities. So password hash versus pass-through authentication is know those two very well because you'll be covered in that, no doubt, as well as how to configure AAD itself. So there's even questions around how to set up a custom domain, which is actually quite straightforward, and know the AAD licenses and the benefits, those P1 and P2s. So P2 obviously offers more identity sort of and risk management, and a P1's pretty much stock standard, but the key thing for P1 is self-service password reset, which is SSPR. No express route and site-to-site VPN configuration. Read through labs on how to set that up. That will definitely be on the exam. So no gateway subnets, local gateways. Not having overlapping address spaces for VNet peering all VPNs, and also no VPN gateway skews. That's pretty simple actually. Storage counts is a big one. So know about storage counts, learn about them. There's basically storage types, how to use shared access signature keys or tokens, SAS tokens is what they call them. Understand the replication limitations, I guess, of which storage accounts, knowing the difference between V1, V2, and the archive options, which is only V2 and blob storage. No cost management. Now, I covered this in the AZ-103 video, very brief segments around cost management. So obviously if you're building a lab, you probably want to know this. So learn how to set budgets, how to read your bills. So tag management using Azure Advisor even. But I think it's more about setting budgets and how to report on resources. Virtual machine scale sets is a tricky one because it can get quite deep because it talks about there's AZ command configuration, custom script extensions. So when you're deploying different images and things like that. So definitely a topic to know. So know Azure Monitor, log analytics workspaces, know how to configure the MMA agents, learn the basics of Custo queries. Action groups, I guess, is a very straightforward option, but alert configurations, so know the parameters inside an alert and the thresholds you can set. So, the greater than options and whatever else. And alert throttling, which is an interesting one. So know, the limits of how many SMSs can be sent, how many emails can be sent in an hour and things like that. Know the SLAs for virtual machines using availability sets and scale sets. You may get asked to meet a certain SLA. Load balancer configuration as well. So you might get questions around backend configuration, so rules, alert probes, backup pools. Azure policies, know how to create them, manage them, and the assignments. Azure DNS, so registered networks and registration networks and command line setup. So that's something that may come up. Next topic is implement workloads and security, which is 25 to 30%. Know the difference between all the roles, owner, contributor, specific contributor, so like virtual machine contributor, network contributor, operator, and reader roles. They're all quite straightforward. Example is owner is the only permission that will allow you to modify access controls. Know Azure AD multi-factor authentication settings, trusted IPs, app passwords, things like that. That will definitely come up. AAD licenses, so I mentioned that before. SSPR, PIM, so privileged identity management, things like that will definitely come up. No conditional access policies. You definitely get asked about that. So user groups, cloud apps, conditions, and grant. I didn't even know the Azure portal comes under cloud apps. So you definitely be asked. An example is a question might be, you need to configure MFA for all administrators accessing the Azure portal from a remote site. So just know that you can get AAD licensed, P2 licensed trials for 30 days. So if you need to sort of configure those, that's a good option. Azure Migrate services, so server assessment tool, appliance deployment, and Azure Migrate projects will definitely be on there. Azure Application Gateway, so that's definitely going to be on there. So that's basically an OSI Layer 7 load balancer. One of Microsoft's best practices with TLS termination is to offload TLS management to an application gateway rather than the servers. So basically offload traffic, offload performance to the actual application gateway as opposed to the web servers. And the application, the web application firewall as well, you'll be asked about that. No custom RBAC definition, so the formatting, configuration options, and AZ commands on how you actually configure it. Next topic is create and deploy apps, which is 5 to 10%. So app service plans, know between the free and shared, dedicated, and isolated tiers. Also know how to scale up and scale out the configuration. Definitely get asked about that. Function app plans, you also get asked about that. I'm still confused to this day between the difference between app service plans and function app plans. They're quite similar. Understand web jobs. You definitely be asked about that. So understand the configuration options and the options that you have between, continuous versus triggered and use cases for web jobs. Azure Logic Apps, you'll get sort of very brief questions around this. So you don't really need to know in depth what they do. But understand workflows, use cases for integrations and how to automate things. Understand Azure AZ commands to deploy infrastructure and app services. So just the AZ commands and how to deploy app services, app service plans as well. Next topic is implement authentication and secure data, which is 5 to 10%. So managed identity use cases is definitely going to be on the exam. Basically, know the use cases and why you use a managed identity. So assign it to a virtual machine, a web app to access passwords from a key vault, things like that. Know Azure Key Vault, so just access policies, again, the managed identity use case, even the firewall options. Next is web app configurations. So this is an interesting one, but you might need to know certain ways for validating client certificates, which is an interesting one. So I knew nothing about that, and encoding types. So just do some reading on that. Azure SQL. So you definitely get questions around that. So know authentication methods, know the double layers of firewall. So firewall at the server, firewall at the database. How to secure your data. So data masking and using always encrypted. So know different use cases. Cosmos DB. So know the API types that it supports, as well as the security and the authentication that you can use. Again, conditional access policies, already covered that. Privileged identity management, that sort of covered as well. So definitely topics that you'd need to know. Develop for the cloud and for Azure storage, which is 15 to 20%. Azure Service Bus, so know, I guess, the functionality of a service bus, sessions, topics, subscriptions, things like that. You would definitely get questions around that. App services, so again, know the plans, the auto scaling, containers, and networking. Azure Service Fabric, you might get a question around this, which is stateless versus stateful reliable services and things like that. So definitely something to read on. Event Grid and Event Hub, so know the difference. One being an event handler and one being a data ingestion service. So just know the difference and the use cases for them. Cosmos DB again, so know consistency levels. You may get asked about that, so definitely something to read up on. Azure Data Migration Services, you will definitely get questions around this. So around the data migration assistant use cases, and things around licensing and benefits, using on-prem licenses as opposed to standard Azure SQL licenses. Just some helpful tips along the way. Understand the differences of app service plans and limitations. It's a bit silly to know the ins and outs of these plans because you probably won't use all these combinations, but you'll get tested on them. Know Azure SQL and Cosmos DB, so know the use cases. I've already covered the topics, but that's something that I was not that familiar with, especially Cosmos DB. Scenario-based questions, focus on the question first. Sometimes that's easier because you'll find a scenario question just overloads you with information, and sometimes you don't need to actually consider every factor for the question. So I'd suggest that if you feel overwhelmed, go to the question first and then go look for the scenario topics, I guess, that suit your question. Focus on certain keywords again. Microsoft will say one or two things that will actually change, I guess, your decision. So data center failure versus region failure. So that's going to be a common one. Cost should be minimized is also still on the card. Understanding the cheapest option to meet the minimum requirements. Again, trust your gut. It's quite easy to be overwhelmed when you're doing exams. Follow your own process to learn your own way. There's no right way to study and there's no right way to learn because everyone does everything differently. And the better prepared you are, the more confident you'll be. Udemy videos are great out there. Scott Duffy is the king, although I didn't follow him this time. Everyone recommends it. Obviously, building through labs, I learned the best through building through labs, and hands-on experience is the best way I learn. And everyone has their own process. So the more knowledge that you can sort of back yourself with, the easier it is to make a decision. When you do an exam, especially a Microsoft one, multiple choice, you can generally rule out 2 of the answers out of the 4. That's a very handy tip. But yeah, just trust your gut. Okay, final thoughts on the AZ-300. If you have a look at the table there, I've got a side-by-side comparison of the topics. You can see that they've gone and consolidated them and sort of rephrased them. I think they just went, we can do these a bit simpler. I think the exam would cover a lot of new Azure features, so workbooks, monitor for VM, application insights. There'll be probably Azure firewall configuration, front door service, and bastion services. Obviously, if you're studying for the exam, it should be covered in all your course materials. So these are just my thoughts. You should also follow your own process in studying. Take this episode as just sort of insights from someone that's done the exam and someone that's got experience in the industry as well. There will definitely be more on Azure Container Registry and instances, as well as AKS. So Azure Kubernetes Services, I think they will definitely be in there. There's basically a new topic there that mentions implement and manage data platforms. So my assumption is there'll be more emphasis on Azure SQL, Cosmos DB, a whole bunch of other data platforms, I feel. Like I said, your course materials should cover all of this. So this is more of a overview of my thoughts on what will be on the exam. I may do them. I'm looking at doing the AZ-300 still, and probably the AZ-400, which is the DevOps exam. And I may do the 303 and the 304 sometime next year. I'm not in a rush at this point, because I'm learning day to day at work already. Thanks for watching. And if you're following this on one of the podcasting platforms, thanks for the support. I hope this has helped in some sort of way. I know it is about a retired exam, but I think there would only be maybe 10-15% difference with the AZ-300 exam. I think there's still benefits to this episode, basically giving you insights on someone that's done the exam and someone that works in the industry, because the exams are really not that hard. I think it's just about developing your experience, your knowledge, and your confidence to be able to answer these multiple choice questions and scenario-based simulations, I guess. Something I should mention is the exams at the moment don't actually have any labs. I don't know. Thinking back, I think labs will actually make it easier, because anyone can really click ops. If you have an interface, you can navigate through it. But there are no labs that I've had at the moment. I think they've taken out potentially for COVID. But if you're planning on sitting an exam, good luck with that. I hope this has helped. I'm Sunny, and I'm your host, and this is Someone Else's Cloud. Checking out.